Maybe you've heard this before, remarked Ted. You're not a human being seeking a spiritual experience. You're a spiritual being having a human experience. All human beings are spiritual beings, but most sleepwalk through their days. They are unaware of the reality that they have a greater capacity for choice than they know. The vicious cycle created by the victim orientation and the dreaded drama triangle pulls people into the darkest depths of the human experience and breeds hopelessness. They long for a magical someone or something to race to their rescue, but no matter how much tough luck the human experience dishes out, the creator orientation and the empowerment dynamic provide a larger perspective. This is what I mean about your taking on a spiritual perspective. Instead of a vicious cycle of reacting, this perspective offers a virtuous cycle of growth and development to anyone who adopts it. Think of it this way, David. Your life is a kind of learning laboratory where you're constantly experimenting with your own higher knowing, always increasing your capacity to design your life and to choose your response to what happens to you. Human beings must create. It's hardwired. The reality is this: you cannot not create. The question is, are you creating consciously or sleepwalking through your life, simply reacting to what comes at you? While you may not directly cause everything that happens to you, you do have the capacity to choose your response to circumstances. And you have a great deal more responsibility for what appears in your life than you might want to admit. One of the biggest challenges is waking up to this reality, making the shift happen on a daily basis, and working to stay awake. That reminds me of Viktor Frankl, Sophia said. He was a psychologist who was imprisoned in Nazi death camps during World War II. He lived through unspeakable hardships and could easily have qualified as a victim. During that time, though, Viktor Frankl had a mind-blowing revelation. I have a quote from him written in my journal here. Everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. To me, that's quite a creator statement. I looked out at the ocean. I have to say, this all feels a little overwhelming. It's a lot to take in and to take on. Sophia replied, I know, David. When Ted and I first had this conversation, I felt the strangest mixture of excitement and fear. Right now you're setting a new course. It's going to affect the rest of your life, so take it easy. Take it a day at a time. The journey starts with the fundamental choice to live with the creator orientation. Sophia's description fit perfectly. In the pit of my stomach, a weird cocktail of emotions was shaking itself up. Try using your own dynamic tension, those mixed emotions, by consciously choosing to live as a creator, she continued. Each day, take a look at your current reality. When and where do the old habits of the victim orientation show up? Likewise, what's it like when you're in alignment with the creator orientation? Pay attention to these new choices and behaviors and celebrate them. Keep on taking the baby steps that will transform the reactivity of the DDT and victimhood into your new way of being. Oh, you make it sound so easy, I said. As I said before, it's simple, but not always easy, Sophia said. It's important to develop the habit of noticing the choices you're making. I spend about 20 minutes each morning doing this. I sit quietly and say a little prayer of gratitude for my awakening. Then I invite guidance to support my living more fully as a creator. I end by affirming that I choose to live this way, cultivating TED. Relationships that offer mutual support. I spend a few minutes remembering how I did the day before in moving toward creator choices. Then I decide on 3 baby step actions I will take that day. They're usually things like having a particular conversation, or reading an article, or making an appointment. It's amazing how those baby steps give momentum and purpose to the day. There are 2 important criteria for defining a baby step. First, it is something that is doable, something I could really take action on. The second is that it is 100% mine to do. That second one really makes me stop sometimes because it forces me to clarify my own responsibility and the fact that I can't make someone else take a step for me. Doable and 100% mine to do. Remember those principles as you choose your own baby steps. In the end, David, we're talking about choice, Ted pointed out. On the one hand, it's about choosing what you feel called to create, and the steps you take in the process of living into your vision. On the other hand, you also choose your response to what shows up in your life, either as a conscious response or an unconscious reaction. When you simply react, it means you're choosing the way of the victim. If, on the other hand, you stay mindful of current reality and determine how best to respond, you've entered the empowerment dynamic. Sophia added, unfortunately, before they can begin to make better choices, most people have to hit bottom in the victim orientation and the dynamics of the DDT. Some people say that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for different results. As that way of being gets more painful, the possibility of breaking through to the creator orientation and TED opens up. Then, just as is happening with you, a person reaches that sacred and bittersweet place called the choice point. What do you mean by choice point? I asked. Ted's eyes sparkled. As you go through your daily experience, at every point in time, you're faced with a choice about which orientation and dynamic you want to live within, and which role you're going to play. The choice point is that moment in which you can consciously make a shift happen. The main way you make a shift is by choosing a more empowered role to play. Consider the roles within the DDT and TED relationship triangles. You can shift roles to shift orientations. Ted reached out with his walking stick and drew a vertical line in the sand. At the top, he scratched CR, and at the bottom he wrote V, victim to creator. There are 2 ways to look at the shift between roles, Ted said. First, you can change the way you see yourself. That very choice begins to make the shift happen. Second, you can change the way you view the people, conditions and circumstances in your life. This also creates a shift. You might call one shift intra-personal, meaning within yourself. This is where you shift how you meet your life experience. The other shift is interpersonal, which involves how you interact with others. This means being conscious of the roles you play in relating to and with others. As you focus on making shift happen, there is one reality that you must always keep in mind. You can only change yourself. You cannot make shift happen for others. However, as you grow more skilled at taking on the roles of creator, challenger, and coach, others may make their own choices to change. But you cannot make it your goal to change them. You can only change yourself. You've already made the most important shift, David, Sophia said. But let me ask you this. When you find yourself lapsing into the victim role from time to time, how do you think you could make the shift to creator? I thought over all that Ted and Sophia had told me about creator orientation. Well, I said, I could remember that a creator stays focused on a desired outcome, while a victim is focused on problems. I guess the first thing I'd have to do would be to decide what I really want. Oh, you're a pretty quick study. Sophia gave me a big grin. That's the key to making the shift happen. You stop and ask yourself, what do I really want here? If I could have or do or be anything my heart desired right now, what would that look like? Who and how do I choose to be in this situation? Just asking the question shifts your focus towards what you want to create. And there's one other very important thing to consider. When you're asking what you want, make sure that whatever it is, it's intended for the highest good and won't bring harm to anyone or anything. Okay, I said, but isn't being a creator about manifesting whatever you want? Well, yes and no, Sophia smiled. Yes, because it is about creating what you want to bring into your life. But no, a creator doesn't focus only on what he or she wants without considering its impact on others. Creating in that way would be ego-driven. Insisting on that kind of creating can easily set you up for slipping into the persecutor role, losing touch with the creator stance. Ted explained, asking yourself what you want, rather than focusing on what you don't want, is the way of making shift happen between both the victim and creator orientations and victim and creator roles. It is choosing what you want to create, keeping in mind what Sophia just said, and it is choosing your response to your current realities. That is the interpersonal shift, the intra-personal shift. Standing in the position of creator carries with it a great deal of responsibility, including how you respond to others, which is the interpersonal shift. Most of humanity is still sleepwalking through life in the victim orientation. You can help nudge people awake, depending on how you interact with them, but you cannot force them to make any of the shifts we are talking about. Sophia interjected, I've learned that one the hard way, Ted. I finally figured out that the fastest way of getting someone to see me as a persecutor is for me to tell them that they are just being a victim. Ted smiled and nodded in agreement. First and foremost, a creator extends compassion to others. You can do this by seeing people as being creators, whether they know it or not, and whether they're acting like it or not. As you make this shift in the way you see and interact with others, you can consciously step into one of the other TED roles. You become the co-creator by serving as either a challenger or a coach, depending on the situation. Persecutor to challenger. Ted placed his stick just below the CR and drew a diagonal line that ended just to the left of the V. He wrote P at the top and CH at the bottom. Persecutor and challenger. He said, this is one of the most powerful shifts of all, from persecutor to challenger. Most persecutors show up in your life as deconstructive challengers. You'd rather avoid them. But when you're able to shift your view of persecuting people, conditions, or circumstances, the strangest thing happens. Their actions have an entirely different impact on you. The empowering impact of the challenger. Discovering this opens up a whole new world of possibility. You may wake up to a greater understanding of your anger, for one thing. Anger is one of the most powerful and feared of human emotions. In the DDT, anger correlates with fear. It's the central emotion of the persecutor. With TED, though, anger can be a powerful motivating force. Used constructively, it helps you to move toward whatever you're passionate about. I'm not sure what you mean, I said. Behind every experience of anger lies something you care about. Otherwise you wouldn't feel the anger, explained Ted. Many great contributions arose as empowered responses to anger. Gandhi, for example, felt anger about the injustice of British rule over India. It fueled his determination to lead a peaceful resistance movement that led India's people to win their independence. Another possibility presented by the empowerment dynamic is forgiveness. You cannot make the shift from persecutor to challenger without some measure of forgiveness of both yourself and others. Someone once said that forgiveness is giving up the hope of ever having a better past. There's nothing you can do to change the past, but you can choose how you think about what has already happened in your life. You can then apply the learning from that experience to the process of creating what you care about. Anger and forgiveness were so important in my learning from and letting go of my relationship with Dan, Sophia said. At one point, I came across a quote from the writer and philosopher Henri Nouwen, who said, "Forgiveness changes the way we remember. It converts the curse into a blessing." Once I surrendered to the fact that I could not change what had already happened between Dan and me, I was able to redirect my energy to focus on what I wanted to create in my life. Now I can honestly say I'm grateful for our divorce, painful as it was, because of what I've learned and overcome by dealing with it. When problems and obstacles arise, and they always do, they're part of the creating process. And Ted said, welcome them as teachers. They are challenging you to grow. In that way, you transform your situation into an opportunity for action, or at least for learning, and the gift of the challenger is yours. The pain received from the persecutor then magically becomes the bittersweet fruit of deepening knowledge, of learning from your experience. I thought about how anger and forgiveness had been darting around me, inside me in various ways in response to Dad's passing, the infertility and the divorce. It felt like sifting through the rubble of what seemed to be the ruins of my life. So, how do I begin to do that? I asked. There's an exercise you can use, Sophia offered. First, make a list of the people, conditions or circumstances you've thought of as persecutors. For each one of them, list at least 7 ways they've been a gift or a teacher to you. How have they challenged you to learn and grow? I groaned. With some things, that's easier said than done. Maybe so, Sophia said, but I think you'll be surprised at what you uncover. The trick is to keep asking yourself questions. What is the lesson this person or situation is bringing into my life? How and what can I learn from this? What's the gift hidden in this situation, no matter how difficult it appears? Once you've written down the challenger's lessons and gifts, spend some time going a little deeper. I suggest journaling at that point. As things become clearer, ask yourself more questions. What insights have I gained from this experience? Is this lesson complete for now? If it is, am I fully ready to forgive, let go, and move forward in my life? By making this list and asking these questions, you can transform all your persecutors into challengers. David, said Ted, there's another aspect of making the shift from persecutor to challenger that can be even trickier than what Sophia's describing. What could be trickier than that? I blurted. What we've been talking about so far is the intra-personal shift, how you choose to respond to a persecutor in your life. The trickier shift is the interpersonal one, when you find yourself in the role of persecutor, or if someone perceives you as one. Shifting yourself from persecutor to challenger takes tremendous conscious focus and effort, and no small measure of humility. You can often tell if someone is perceiving you as a persecutor by the way he reacts to what you say or do. If he starts getting defensive, that's a clue that you're showing up for him in the persecutor role. I thought back to my experience with my ex-wife as our marriage was crumbling. There were so many times when she reacted defensively to what I said or did. There could be no doubt that I had repeatedly fallen into the persecutor role. Ted continued. When you notice how the other person is reacting to you, the first thing to do is to clarify your intention. What are you really doing? If your intention is to look good, to be right, to be one up, or to instill fear, then you must stop in your tracks. Gather yourself and apologize for your actions or words. Then, the hardest part is to let go of the whole thing. On the other hand, if you're clear that your intention is to challenge the other person, to learn or develop his capacity as a creator, the best thing to do is to ask for a do-over. Begin by acknowledging that your behavior did not come across as you had intended and apologize. This communication closes the gap between your intention and the negative impact of your previous approach. When you're making the interpersonal shift from persecutor to challenger, it's important to acknowledge the other person's worth, his power, his responsibility for making his own choices and decisions. Then you can invite him to consider your point of view. The challenge is to adopt a take-it-or-leave-it stance about whatever you share or suggest. The decision to take your advice is his to make. Everyone creates his or her own life experience and has a set of personal lessons to learn. The choices people make will create the outcomes they reap. I call it the Challenger Challenge, Sophia said, because it is the most difficult TED role to master. To become a conscious and constructive challenger takes a lot of time to develop. Sophia then took a step toward me. David, if your former wife was standing here with us, what could you say to her to make a shift from persecutor to challenger? A flock of pelicans soared along the edge of the bluff and down the beach. As I thought about what I might say, I felt my heart loosen, and with that, a flood of tears. I choked out a few words. I'd say I was sorry for the way I blamed and verbally attacked her. I'd tell her I know she was going through a difficult time too, and I'd want her to know that I believe she was doing the best she could in her own way. Excellent, Sophia said. Now, what would you say your intention was? Strange, I said. My intention was to connect with her, to bridge the distance between us. But the things I actually did drove us further apart. I'd tell her that. I'd tell her how I want to learn and grow through this process, even though it's painful, and that I want to keep communicating wherever it leads us. Then I'd ask if she was willing to talk it over. Good start, Sophia said. What would you do if she said no to talking? Well, instead of feeling rejected and reacting as a victim, I'd like to believe that if I was really speaking in the framework of TED, I'd accept that as her choice. I'd just leave her with an open invitation to talk when and if she was ready. And that, my dear, is the way of a creator, Sophia grinned. And while it may be easier said than done, that's the way it is said, and that's the way it is done. It is possible. Ted, who had been listening attentively, now chimed in. I must say it's fun to see you two working together. Keep in mind, too, that a creator is capable of consciously assuming either the role of challenger or the role of coach. Rescuer to coach. Ted drew a third line in the sand. At the top of this line he wrote R, and at the bottom CO, rescuer, coach. He then turned to me and said, one of the biggest temptations of people who want to help others, to make a contribution in the world, is to fall into the victim orientation role of rescuer. It's one thing to lend a helping hand when someone has fallen, but it's quite another to assume you have to walk on his or her behalf. A rescuer sees the other person as a needy and powerless victim. Rescuers breed dependence. They thrive on the need to be needed by a victim. A coach, on the other hand, remembers that other people are creative, resourceful, whole beings, capable of creating their heart's desires, again, whether they know it or not, and whether they act like it or not. A coach assumes others are responsible for their life choices and experiences. A rescuer is attached to outcomes and sees it as his responsibility to fix the victim. But a coach is not attached to any particular outcome. Rather, the coach serves and supports a creator in manifesting his or her desired outcomes. On the intra-personal level, if you perceive that someone is trying to be a rescuer or to fix you or your situation, the way to make shift happen is to thank them for their concern and to own your responsibility as a creator. You can then invite them to help you as a coach if it feels right. I asked, so what can I do when I want to help someone without becoming a rescuer myself? It's so easy for me to take on that role. Be curious. Ask questions, answered Sophia. A coach's major contribution is in the questions he asks. Rescuers have a tendency to tell others what they should do, giving advice or instruction. Coaches make occasional suggestions, but without concerning themselves with whether other people follow their recommendations. Great coaches ask great questions that help creators gain clarity about what they want. Questions also help creators accurately assess their current reality and decide what needs to be done, and commit to the actions that support them in moving toward fulfilling their dreams. When we were exploring the nature of the victim yesterday, you might remember that every victim has a dream that somehow has been denied or thwarted. And Ted said, one of the most powerful and helpful ways to shift from rescuer to coach is to ask the other person what it is that she wants. And Sophia added, help her identify the dream that has been denied or thwarted. What do you really want here? If you could have or do or be anything your heart desired right now, what would that look like? Who and how do you choose to be or to respond in this situation? These are all questions that help a person shift into her own creator orientation. Another great way to contribute is to help someone see the gifts and lessons a persecutor has made available to them. Sophia continued, you can do that by asking her the same sort of questions I raised a minute ago when you were working to make your own shift from the persecutor to the challenger role. You might ask, what is the lesson this person or situation is bringing into your life? How and what can you learn from this? What's the gift hidden in this situation, no matter how difficult it appears? The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. Our shadows encircled Ted's sand drawing, which now looked something like an asterisk. As I studied the crossroads in the sand, I felt Ted's hand on my shoulder. There you have it, David. All your choices are right here at your feet. Here you can see all the roles of the victim orientation with its dreaded drama triangle, as well as the creator orientation and the empowerment dynamic. My challenge to you, my friend, is to stay awake to the choices you make every day and to the relationships you cultivate. Then Ted pulled something from his shirt pocket. A small pendant of some sort strung on brown twine. As Ted held it out, I saw that it was the shape of a tiny sand dollar. This is for you, David. It's to remind you of all you now know. In this way it offers a source of protection. See the centre? It's an asterisk like the one in the sand, a symbol of the choice you always have before you, victim or creator. Ted looked at me for a long moment before reaching over my head and placing the amulet around my neck.